looking at MMP9. Once again, we don't have the huge elevation, 900, 1100, 1300, that you see in one of the handouts I have for you, and that will be on the website, so we'll have to get that to you a bit later. Specifically, if we have antibiotics, there's not much difference, and in fact, some of these, actually the numbers go up a little bit. And it's not a surprise that MMP9 is showing ongoing cytokine effect. Remember, MMP9 is made from MMP14, which is manufactured by endothelial cells, macrophages, and monocytes. MMP9 after treatment does beautifully. And what I did not do, and feel I probably should have, is measured MMP9 after Actos was done, because those numbers would have been lower. It just wasn't built into the protocol for the study, and it's a hole, I think, in what we should have done. Visual contrast. Remember, we talked a good bit about visual contrast over the last few days. What I have not told you is that VCS is not 100%. 8% of my patients who are sick and get better with treatment will have normal VCS scores that improve with therapy. So that VCS by itself can be negative, and at the break I was kind of talking about the curious finding that of the people with VCS negative scores, or VCS negative tests, there's a disproportionate representation of younger people, primarily teenage women, but then of the older people that include men, you'll find baseball players, you'll find artists, you'll find photographers, interior designers, and it's kind of neat. I wonder what Ted Williams' visual contrast scores would have been. I mean, that guy could see an edge, right? And then Ansel Adams, what kind of edge did he see? It's just really kind of nifty. Boy, you've got quite an eye. No, I've got good contrast vision. Thank you very much. Anyway, we see some improvement with antibiotics, but the improvement that I want, and this number is a little misleading, I don't stop the biotoxin stuff until I get visual contrast fixed. So to say that this fixed in a month, or coagnate staph, or ADH and osmo is not broken out so you can see each one of the steps. But when we're finally done, it's 0. And then we say, if none are positive, are all they negative? Yeah. And then we look at what happens in the HLA susceptible group. This one jumps off the page, because here, if you're HLA susceptible, you are not going to have visual contrast improve with antibiotics. And what this number says is that the reduction after antibiotics that we saw of the total group comes from the group that's not HLA susceptible. And basically, visual contrast guides you in what you do. And the fact it might be normal at baseline doesn't mean it's going to stay normal. It'll continue. And you keep on treating until you get a VCS at plateau. Now, some people have been injured enough and their VCS will never come back to normal. That's a very small number. But don't be disheartened. Once you've got a plateau and the patient's doing well, just make sure you have good follow-up if you stop treatment and VCS is still positive. Okay, here's one of the graphic representation. This is a different study that we did with a smaller number of people. Here is the group before antibiotics, here's after antibiotics, and here's with the cholestyramine protocols. Yes?
On that last slide, when you went to the 0 after the treatment, that was just with cholestyramine and Actos. That didn't involve...
No, what was misleading is that that's the whole protocol. You know, I fixed everything that needed to be fixed has to be fixed, and I didn't break it out by step. We've talked a good bit about different kinds of inflammatory parameters. Th17 is still, in my mind, brand new. There's new things all the time coming out about Th17 in immunology journals. And then the latest one that we have to learn is called Th9. I don't know enough about Th9 other than say that it exists, and there's a stack of papers that I need to read. But the critical issue is that the complexity of the immune response does not mean we have the luxury of not treating with what we have now. If you go to the Hill paper that's included in your packet as number 28. This is a short lecture given in 1965 by Sir Thomas Hill looking at causation. And I get to answer a lot of these changes in distortions of what Hill actually says in mold litigation. But the bottom line is you act on what you know to be true now, understanding that pure toxicological certainty won't be coming till later. As physicians, you have a duty to act now. You don't have to look at a burning house and say, well, I wonder how much longer it's going to burn and what temperature will cause the porcelain to crack. The answer is you put out the fire. All right, we've talked a bit about TGF-beta 1 being a big player. You saw how important it was in these 150 patients. I do not have any way to assess for TH17 cells or IL-17. They're made by TH17 cells. Hopefully that'll be available commercially in the future. But once again, I go back to the burning house. We're not going to wait till the porcelain cracks. Treat what you now know. I've talked to you about CD4, CD25 cells. FOXP3 is the nuclear replication factor. It concerns me that we are looking at what should be suppression of autoimmune findings with increased levels of CD4, CD25 cells, and yet in autoimmunity, that's where you find some of the highest levels of TGF-beta 1. And this positive reinforcing cycle of conversion of Tregs in tissue to pathogenic T cells requires additional definition as we go forward. I really feel that in the end, we're going to find that interventions that raise Treg cells will help our post-Lyme patients even more than what we see in Lyme. There's got to be a way to access effector T cells in tissue that we don't know just yet, and perhaps the kinase inhibitors will be the way to go. We do know that FOXP3 is a factor that will be identified for us now that LabCorp has promised to bring this forward. Quest, look, they have no way of doing that in Chantilly or out at Nichols Institute. But specifically, we want to knock out the high levels of TGF-beta 1.